Este foarte bine să-ți cunoști trecutul, dar nu te poți raporta doar la el. În prezent sunt lideri care se agață de istorie și cred că momente pe care națiunile lor le-au trăit cândva se vor întoarce. Toate marile puteri trebuie să înțeleagă că în acest secol sferele de influență nu mai pot funcționa și că fiecare țară are dreptul să-și aleagă parcursul pe care vrea să-l urmeze alături de partenerii pe care îi preferă. Autocrații, iar Vladimir Putin este cel mai bun exemplu, încă nu renunță la ideea că înainte era mai bine și insistă să ducă războaie absurde. Rusia nu va redeveni imperiu, URSS nu va avea o a doua șansă la viață, iar Ucraina va rămâne independentă. Este doar o chestiune de timp și, din păcate, de pierderi mari de vieți omenești, dar rezultatul devine previzibil. O lume fără principii clare de guvernare înseamnă haos, iar de acesta profită doar dictatorii, niciodată cetățenii. Invitatul meu de astăzi este Juris Poikans, ambasadorul Letoniei în România, cu reședință la Varșovia, un fin cunoscător al regiunii în care trăim. Sunt Cristina Cileacu, începe Pașaport diplomatic. Juris Poikans, ambassador of Latvia in Romania, welcome to Diplomatic Passport.
Thank you, good afternoon.
Ambassador, you have an expertise in Russia and Eastern countries overall. And let's talk first about a recipe that we saw it is repeating, especially on the eastern flank. The voice of the nationalists are increasing, the tonality is growing. Do this type of politicians really have connections with Russia in sense of material and ideological connections, or is just somebody that take, let's say, the advantage of using this idea of Russia?
I think what we see during these last 20 years happening in the Russian Federation, it's gradual degradation of democracy, democratic values. The country has resorted to very strong authoritarian rule. In general, Mr. Putin, except this short period when Mr. Medvedev used to be the president, he's in power since 2001. I wouldn't say that exactly the example of Russia is very, let's say, interesting for nationalists around the worldwide. I think it's in general what we see. The world is facing very complex economic issues. For last decade, or we can say for last 2 decades. And people are asking for relatively simple solutions. And this is where the authoritarian rulers try to show that they are better off in facing these challenges. When we look at another neighbor of Latvia, for example, Belarus, we have President Lukashenko, who is holding power since 1984. Yes, he faced a very strong resistance to his power in 2020, but in general, for these last 26 years, he has always had a part of the electorate who was really believing. And even nowadays, I would count that he's supported by around 30% of the population, but it's enough for him to keep the power. So I would say, and we see also the example of Turkey, where increasingly Mr. Erdogan is trying to strengthen his rule, referring sometimes to some kind of very old traditions. And when you start referring to some historical experiences, it doesn't mean anything good, because at the end of the day we are living today and we must look into the future, and the world needs modern solutions. And as I think Mr. Churchill mentioned, there is no better system invented as democracy.
But in the same time, as I said, these voices increase, including in Latvia, a Baltic country that has a border with Russia, that has a population of Russian origins. And these voices says that Latvia, which is a country that helps quite a lot Ukraine,
yes,
it's known for this fact, should use better these funds. They say that these funds are being thrown away for nothing. What will happen if Ukraine will not receive the help of countries like ours?
I think when you look at the situation in Ukraine, it's quite obvious Ukraine cannot lose. Ukraine cannot lose because the European security architecture was damaged already during 2008, when we remember the so-called independence of Abkhazia and South Ossetia. Then we faced an occupation of the peninsula of the Crimea. Now, by the way, Russia was printing yesterday already new maps with these occupied territories included as a part of the Russian Federation. We know from the European history what happens when you start again referring to historical experiences, to historical territories, who has owned what in the past. Because you can claim that, for example, Wrocław used to be German, Kaliningrad used to be German. So if we come back to these type of discussions, we will end nowhere. Because the borders we are living at this moment, we might like them, we might dislike them, but these are borders established, and this was our understanding in Europe, that they are sacred and you cannot violate them. So, number one, what we face if Ukraine loses. So if we legalize this now, the effect of the occupation. So it means borders can be changed in Europe. Let's assume it. So what does it mean for Western Balkans, where some countries are really keeping together, sometimes in a way not willing to coexist together. But if you don't coexist together, if you start playing games again, referring to some kind of historical justices or injustices, we might end up into another failure. So we should strive for the restoration of Ukraine's territorial integrity according to the borders of 1991. If it doesn't happen, it brings, as I mentioned, number one is, so borders have been changed. We get an aggressive neighbor next to our border. And when you mean by aggressive neighbor, you are situated in the eastern flank of NATO and European Union. We are also situated in the eastern flank. So it means the island of Zmini, I believe, is how many kilometers from the, let's say, border of Romania. So you would immediately feel its pressure. For example, one indirect effect, what we feel in Latvia, is, and I spoke about that in the Romanian Chamber of Commerce, we depend on tourism. And people are less coming to Latvia because they believe that it's very close to the war zone. So we will be affected politically, economically, we will need to spend on our defense, so we will need to take this money, let's say, from our social payments, from support to our societies, but we will need to arm ourselves in order to be sure that our independence stays intact.
These politicians use two different ideas. When Russia is killing Ukrainian civilians, for instance, they don't care. They say that the biggest threat is the fact that the evil West is trying to take over the Europe. How is this, if we look at it, is our failure on explaining this democracy, or is our failure on countering the Russian propaganda?
I think the key problem here is not about us. When you listen at Russia's politicians, at first they refer to some kind of an agreement that NATO will never launch, which was never, in general, put into practice and nothing was ever promised. The second is, when the Berlin Wall collapsed, and in general the socialist system collapsed, we took it as principle as granted in Europe that there will never be any return to the spheres of influence, that we can choose any type of partners we want. And at the end of the day, it was Romania and Latvia, no one was pushing us, who wanted to join the European Union and NATO. So the question I would address to people in Moscow, why people in Bucharest, in Riga, wanted to become a part of the Western world? I'm afraid the answer is because we knew what was our history. We knew it. The second, we were really poor countries. So in a way, what I hear, for example, during the socialist times in Romania, when you didn't have heating for years, so people wanted to improve their lives, and they understood it can happen only through an alliance with the European Union and NATO. Coming now to Ukraine, again, if we accept this principle, there are no spheres of influence, and we obviously think in this way, Ukraine has any right to choose which country or union they want to join. So at the end of the day, Ukrainians have said it clearly after Maidan in 2014. They see their future together with the European Union and NATO. So yes, I admit, there are strong ethnic links between Russians and Ukrainians, Russians and Belarusians. But this is nothing unique in European history. You have Moldova, you have Romania. So you have two countries, one Romanian nation. You have Austrians, you have Germans. Both speak the German language. You have a big part of Switzerland speaking German. At the same time, the Republic of Ireland is largely using English. But no one would think in London that Ireland is a part of some kind of a mystical English world. So here, from my point of view, it's not the question that we didn't explain something or we provoked this crisis, but we allowed every country on the European continent, and for example, Armenia doesn't have any plans to join the European Union, Azerbaijan also doesn't have any plans. But if Moldova have, Ukraine have, so it's a question about whether they meet standards or not. It's not about political, let's say, vetoes. No, they can never become a member. So if we abolish this principle, then we return back to the issue, okay, no, there are spheres of influence, so it means they can join, but they cannot join. And it cannot run this way. So I believe it's more a question, how attractive is Russia as a partner for these countries? So it turns out that it's not very attractive.
But what is Putin actually wanting? Because we remember before he started the war in Ukraine, he wrote a letter to the Western leaders saying that he wants even the countries in the East that are member of NATO to be under his influence. How can anyone think that a country that is a member of NATO will turn again towards the values of Russia?
There are two aspects, I think, in Putin's and Russian thinking. The first one is there is deep conviction held that Russians, Belarusians and Ukrainians are one nation. Do we like it or not? But there is a deep held conviction. Obviously, it's a lot of inter-ethnic links existing between Russians, Ukrainians, Russians, Belarusians. However, when I was working in Ukraine, the former Prime Minister of Ukraine, Vladimir Putin, told me he has never been to Russia. So it doesn't mean that everyone has relatives in Moscow, Petersburg or somewhere else. But okay, many have. So in this situation, I would say it's not about NATO enlargement. I don't believe NATO is threatening Russia. If Mr. Putin was claiming that it's a very short flight distance between Kharkiv and Moscow, sorry to say, it's very short between Tallinn and Petersburg as well. I think the key factor of this war has a very imperialistic nature, and it's a colonial war. It was a war with a deeply held conviction that this belongs to this so-called Russian world. The second thing is, Putin has always openly admitted that he believes the collapse of the Soviet Union is the largest geopolitical catastrophe. But what is the difference? Belarus and Ukraine will always play, and have always played, much bigger role in the Russian thinking, let's say, than Estonia or Tajikistan or Georgia and Armenia. So here you find two factors. One is this conviction, and the second is really this desire to recreate some kind of, let's say, replica of the Soviet Union.
You did mention the problem of heating in the communist Romania, and it looks like this situation is going back in our lives, including in the rest of Europe, not only in case of Romania. People don't understand simply why the energy price is so high right now. And in this case, some countries in the European Union seem to forget about principles, and they say, look, we can still buy gas from Russia, let's make the deals and let's forget for the moment about principles. How shall we treat these countries in the level of our European Union bloc?
I think there is no other way but to hold a dialogue with all countries which seem to be skeptical, let's say, about some moves. We have not invented anything better at this moment. Let's start. If we abandon principles at this moment and let's say restart buying the Russian gas, the first countries which will suffer will be those who are situated in, let's say, on the eastern borders of the European Union. So it will affect Romania and the Baltic states and Poland primarily. So for us, the abandonment of these principles is really a question, it's a threat to our national security. So I agree, we will face a difficult winter, we understand it. This difficult winter will touch not only citizens, it will touch our industries, it will touch, let's say, restaurants in Bucharest, in Riga, hotels, understandable. But we are not big countries. We have always been surrounded by bigger neighbors. Our key interest is, at the end of the day, to live as we want to live. And one of our guarantees is the European Union. So as a result, the European Union is probably the best project ever invented on the continent of Europe. Those countries which are situated farther off, understandably, they will always have a different perception. Many of them have not had even serious interactions historically with Russia. You know it very well, we know it very well, but let's look again from a different perspective. You have, for example, the northern part of Africa, which is a very serious concern for many southern European states, and very often, honestly, to say we don't understand their concerns. So I would say the key is only about dialogue, it's about solidarity, it's about exchanging opinions. There should be a clear understanding that we must stop the war, clearly, but we must stop the war which is in Europe's interest. And in Europe's interest, this is a restoration of Ukraine's territorial integrity. So I wouldn't say the situation is bad. Obviously, we go from the first package of sanctions to second, now already to the eighth. So it means we can agree. We can agree. And the solidarity is still, from my point of view, one of the most important principles for many EU member states. Even if sometimes they disagree on one or another detail, we will always have a bigger interest in Europe's East. For you, it's Moldova, it's Ukraine. For us, it's also Moldova and Ukraine. It's also Belarus. We want to see also democratic Russia at the end of the day. So for us, this will be always one of the most important interests. And that's why we should stick to the principles and values we are defending at this moment.
In the same time, European Union, being rather an economical bloc, invested less in its foreign politics as a bloc. Do we see some changes at this level right now concerning these internal issues we have with countries that are, let's say, more Kremlin-oriented?
I definitely see it. I think we have more coordination. I think what is important, there was a very interesting article yesterday by Mr. Borrell on The Guardian where he was critical of EU diplomacy. I will not comment here whether I share or I don't share it, but I think there is a feeling something has gone wrong. So something went wrong, for example, in predicting this war on the level of the EU diplomacy. So it's good that we are able to identify the problem. I think there is a general feeling among EU member states that there is no other way but to stick together. Let's be realistic, nowadays even Germany or France, having huge economies, wouldn't survive in this global world without the European Union. So they have an interest in coordinating these positions, and they have an interest in listening to us more. We might be, again, having different opinions on the role of Germany played, but what you see also on the other hand, there is a growing interest on behalf of Germany in listening at our concerns, at our opinions, how we see the world, and many are admitting probably we were not investing enough in these links. We see clear steps when it comes to the policy towards Western Balkans. For example, for how many years we were discussing whether we open accession negotiations with Albania and Northern Macedonia or we don't open. So we see some kind of movement here, and by the way, I can also refer to the speech of Chancellor Scholz where he mentions that also Ukraine has a future within this European house. So we see these changes because both for Romania and Latvia, for us, we are both interested in completing the European project, which would mean bringing in the countries of Western Balkans in the European Union and bringing the countries of Eastern Partnership. So I believe there is growing understanding on that. So obviously we are individual member states with different historical experience, with different geographies. This is true. It will always have an impact on our policies, but at the end of the day, you look at the countries like Romania and Latvia. I had today a meeting also with the advisor of the president, and we both concluded there are no open issues between our countries. So there is no question about the geography sometimes. We just view the world from a very similar perspective. It means our diplomacies, Latvian, Romanian, Latvian, Polish, or Latvian, Polish, Romanian, Baltic, we should work together more in explaining how we see the world and what are our priorities. So there is no other way.
So what is your mission as ambassador in Romania, although your residence is in Poland?
You know, I would say maybe my mission I would identify as very modest. I would be very happy after I finish my work in Romania. There is permanent residing ambassador in the Republic of Romania in Bucharest. I would be very happy if we could achieve it. We are ahead of a very important visit by the President of Romania at the end of November. These visits, unfortunately, don't take place so often now. It was COVID before. We don't have an embassy here. Romania doesn't have an embassy in Riga. So we must use this visit as an opportunity to raise awareness about Latvia and Romania and about Romania and Latvia. So this is very important. But I think we must come to the point where Romania is represented in Riga and Latvia is represented in Bucharest.
Ambassador Poikans, thank you so much for this interview.
Thank you for the interview.
Atât pentru astăzi, dar rămânem în continuare online pe pagina de Facebook a emisiunii și pe contul nostru de Twitter. Revenim cu subiecte noi din lumea diplomației și a politicii externe, vinerea viitoare de la 11:30 și reluare sâmbătă după miezul nopții. La revedere!